All right. Good morning, everybody. This is Dan Lyons at the National Weather Service in Raleigh with the routine Monday briefing for Central North Carolina. We're going to talk about the period from today through Sunday, August 30th. Let's jump right in, talk about what's going on. So, for today, if you look at the weather map in the upper left hand corner, you see the vast majority of North Carolina and the vast majority of central North Carolina looking dry. Not much going on. However, if you glance off to the south and east, closer to the coast, closer to I 95 or so, you'll see that there is an area of low pressure not too far away. It's in South Carolina at the moment. And that was actually part of the reason we had a couple showers and thunderstorms earlier this morning that went through Fayetteville, the Sandhills, southern coastal plain, uh, now approaching the Outer Banks as of this recording. That feature is going to be the focal point for some additional showers and thunderstorms later today. Some of that stuff could become strong to severe. We'll certainly keep an eye on that stuff. But areas south and east of the triangle are going to be the areas that have the most likely potential for shower redevelopment this afternoon. We're actually already starting to see a few showers develop um, to the south and east of the triangle. But we'll be watching that area closely. That's where that area of low pressure is. That's where that front is at. Um, but for the rest of the area, it's going to be arguably a very nice day. Dew points are well below where they would normally be this time of year. Temperatures will warm up, but generally speaking, it should be a relatively nice day. That theme is going to continue area wide on Tuesday. I don't have a map up here for Tuesday, but we've got virtually no chance for precipitation across central North Carolina tomorrow. Uh, Dew points again will be relatively comfortable. Again, with no chance of precip, temperatures will be relatively comfortable, and that trend will continue into the first part of Wednesday as well. Now, things get a little bit more complicated as we get closer to Thursday, Friday, and then into the weekend. We're going to see a front uh, attempt to move through the area late this week, Thursday into Friday. You can see it in the map in the lower left hand corner there. You see the low pressure up in Virginia with that front dragging across central North Carolina. It's awfully tough to get those fronts to make it completely through the area off the coast and then high and dry behind that. The most likely scenario is that we'll get some showers and thunderstorms Thursday, Friday associated with that front, and then that front's going to stall very nearby. It might be right across central North Carolina, it might be to our south, it might be near Fayetteville, southern coastal plain, Sandhills area. A lot of the guidance is that front's not going to make it completely through the area. And what that would mean is some additional showers and thunderstorms continuing on and off during the afternoon hours into the weekend. So we'll see exactly how that plays out. But bottom line, a few showers today, certainly a nice dry day tomorrow. Wednesday should start off dry, and then the overall forecast becomes a little bit more unsettled by the time we get Thursday, Friday, and then into the weekend. So let's dive into those details maybe a little bit more here in terms of actual precip amounts that we're forecasting. When you look at the upper left-hand map, you see today's forecast. Most of the states completely dry, zero precip, white on the map. And if there is any rain forecast, you see those darker blue colors. That stuff is all closer to the coast. Again, Fayetteville, Clinton, Goldsboro, Wilson, Rocky Mount, kind of the far eastern fringes, areas along and east of 95 maybe have the best chance for precipitation today. When you get to Tuesday, really nothing area wide to be concerned about. You start to see some increased values on Wednesday, and then certainly when we get to Thursday, Friday, you start to see some higher precipitation values show up on there. Our 5-day totals aren't terribly remarkable, right? We're still dealing with drought. We'll have a map on that here in a couple slides. Uh, but even that 5-day total that you see there, it's not really drought busting amounts that you see there. Maybe one, locally 2 inches or so. So widespread heavy rain, not really in the forecast at this stage of the game. I had briefly mentioned temperatures were going to be relatively comfortable, not too terribly, nothing that's high enough that we need to be concerned about heat advisories or heat warnings or anything like that. So today, Tuesday, Wednesday, minor heat risk across the area. Certainly, if you have sensitivity to the heat, you want to take the proper precautions, but it's not like we're looking at temperatures close to 100 or anything like that. Let's flip back here a little bit and talk about the severe weather potential. I had mentioned areas across the southern coastal plain. That's what's highlighted by the Storm Prediction Center for today. You see that green shading, that darker green shading, I should say, from Goldsboro, maybe through Clinton, down into South Carolina. And then that yellow shading, that's a level 2 risk, and that clips the southern portion of Sampson County and then points east over toward the coast. Those areas are really the areas where storms have the greatest potential to become strong to severe. That lightest shade of green that extends all the way back up to Raleigh kind of orients itself along US 1. That would be, if anything, a very brief pop-up shower, not really expecting any severe weather with that storms, if they even develop in the first place. When we go to Tuesday, you can see virtually no chance of showers and thunderstorms across the area. Again, maybe the Sandhills, southern coastal plain. Those areas tend to see storms before anybody else, generally speaking, so I can't rule out a real quick shower down there, but the chances are extremely, extremely low. Again, Tuesday should be a really quiet day. And then we do see storm chances return area-wide on Wednesday, although not expecting any severe weather with any of that stuff that develops on Wednesday. Consequently, we're not looking at any threats for excessive rainfall, anything of that nature. You see some of the lightest green shading across the far eastern and southeastern part of the state. Of course, that's where we were talking about the front spawning some additional showers and thunderstorms later today. So that's why those areas are highlighted. But then when you look at Tuesday, Wednesday, nothing statewide. And then not shown on these maps here, there are maps available for Thursday and Friday, and they are only showing that lightest shade of green, that marginal, which is suggesting isolated flash flooding is possible. Okay, nothing really beyond that at this point. Let's look at the 8 to 14 day temperature outlook. Sadly, no real strong signal here that we can hang our hat on to suggest temps are going to be above or below normal. Rainfall is going to be above or below normal. It would seem that the long wave pattern for next week would suggest temps around normal, precip chances around normal. Nothing really in the cards to say otherwise. Let's talk about the tropics. Of course, we have to this time of year because we are rapidly approaching, we're not there yet, but we are approaching the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season. Today, August 24th, you see in the chart on the upper right, we're not quite at the peak. The peak is around September 10th, so we still have about 3 weeks to go before we get there. That said, there are 2 areas of interest in the tropics that the Hurricane Center is keeping an eye on. The one that's closer to the mainland U.S. has a 50% chance of development, but you can see the area that's highlighted is oriented north-south and away from North Carolina. So that one's not going to be a threat that we have to be concerned about. The Hurricane Center is also monitoring a wave that's going to emerge off of Western Africa at some point, and they have that projected with a 60% chance of development. Other than a rip current risk, there's no immediate concerns for our state over the course of the next 7 days. Again, just because there's no threat doesn't mean we should dismiss this or not be concerned about it. Certainly, these forecasts will be updated and we'll keep an eye on this stuff. But at least over the course of the next 7 days, nothing looks in the cards for North Carolina at this time. So we will continue to monitor that and see where things go. But again, we have a long way to go for the hurricane season before it wraps up. Let's touch briefly on the drought before we wrap up this briefing here. Again, this is the slide that was shared on Thursday. You can see the vast majority of central North Carolina is within that D1 moderate drought. There are some worse conditions near the Virginia state line and some worse conditions down near the South Carolina state line. Central North Carolina has certainly benefited from some rainfall. Late last week, we certainly had some rainfall Thursday and Friday. Folks got some rain. That is not reflected in this graphic that you see here. Those analysis and that discussion and that will be incorporated into the next version of this, which you will see on Thursday. Some folks did quite well, 1 to 2, 3 inches of rain with some of the rain that we had on Friday. But at least where we stand now, pretty widespread, moderate drought remains in place across the area. And we'll see how that changes when the Thursday outlook gets updated. Let's start to bring it home here. Graphical hazards again today. The green that you see on the map or on the chart here is for the marginal risk of severe weather, that level 1 risk, and that's really just confined to the far southeastern corner of our area. If you are west of the triangle, west of US 1, you're good to go today. It should be a very quiet, nice day. No concern today whatsoever. Tuesday is clean across the board, area wide. And then when you get to Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that's when you see the lightning risk start to increase. That's when you see the excessive rainfall risk start to increase just a little bit. And of course, that's because that front's going to be moving through the area during that time frame. All right, so let's summarize it here. Again, today, scattered showers, thunderstorms, that's mainly going to be south and east of the triangle, and that's mainly going to be south and east of I-95, to be a little bit more specific with that. Tuesday, very low rain chances area-wide. Wednesday, we will start to see a little bit of an uptick in our rain chances, but the real increase is going to come Thursday and Friday as we get a front that moves through the area. It's probably going to stall out, which means we could see a continued period of unsettled weather Saturday into Sunday. And of course, any impacts from that stuff, if we do get storms that become strong to severe, gusty winds, lightning are certainly in play with those. The excessive rainfall risk was mostly clean, save for Thursday and Friday when there was a marginal risk across the area where isolated flash flooding could be possible. And that didn't really get to touch on this too much, but again, minor heat risk today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. That does increase just a little bit as we get into the weekend and early next week. But again, no real clear signal in there for widespread excessive heat or anything of that nature.